Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sitecore Global Virtual Summit, where this week we are focusing on the topic of analytics. I'm Michaela Ross-Marin, Field Marketing Manager here at Sitecore, and I'll be your moderator for today. Just to let everyone know, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand shortly after the presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type them in the Ask a Question box right below the slides, and we will answer as many as we can after the presentation. Today we have Mark Floysen joining us from Coveo. There isn't a better person to introduce himself, so Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Michaela. I certainly appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for your time on the call today. Just by way of a little bit of introduction, I've been with Coveo just over a year. I'm in my second year here as CMO. Coveo is a technology partner of Sitecore's, has been for many, many years. And my personal involvement with both companies goes back to actually having previously worked with Sitecore in a product marketing role for a couple of years before joining Coveo. So some of the folks on this call, we've probably met at a prior symposium, if not in your offices. So look forward to following on thereafter. Really, what we're going to cover on today's webinar is several things. Clearly, one of the key things that many organizations face is the challenges that content owners grapple with on a day-by-day basis. So we're going to go into more depth, the kind of things that this webinar will help solve. We're also going to look at the impact of really not taking advantage of the data that's at your fingertips to help inform what sort of content changes should be made. There's a lot of empirical supporting data now that really does document quite clearly how profoundly customers are voting with their feet when they're not being given relevant content, and I'll actually share some of that as well. Perhaps more importantly, we'll then move to some resolutions to that problem. Where do you go for this information? What are the kind of resources that you can bring to bear to help improve the situation? I'll spend some time talking about some practical recommendations, what to do next, and then typically what you can kind of expect in terms of outcomes and so on. We'll follow up with a series of questions and answers, and obviously look forward to those questions coming in so that we can take them live and in real time at the end of the session. So, moving swiftly on. The challenges that content owners face, there are several, and I'm sure that while not all of these challenges will necessarily apply to you today, some may be familiar with you, some may be waiting for you down the road. But what are they? Well, a couple of things we've observed by talking to our customers is, first and foremost, the reality that visitors have a significantly higher expectation as they move forward. I think we've all seen this. It's one of the reasons that many customers have invested in Sitecore, and many other organizations are considering investing in Sitecore, is the ability to deliver much more contextually relevant, tailored, unique experiences. And obviously, from a Coveo point of view, we've seen that within our customers, and we've seen the need to respond to this expectation that's out in the market. Consumers are more mobile, they're more nimble, they're more communicative amongst each other, and they're a lot less patient than they ever have been. And so if they're not feeling that they're being presented with the most relevant content in context, they tend to stray very quickly. This is something that obviously we have from a market point of view, no control over. This is a permanent trend. Consumers, and we're all consumers, so if we put our consumer hat on for a second, we are increasingly impatient and increasingly expectant of having great experiences. And those are judged by us to be based on having the most relevant content presented to us at the point in time that we need it. The challenge, of course, is that many organizations actually lack insight into what content's actually working best. How do you, at a practical operational level, day by day, week by week, continue to make incremental improvements and identify what the best performing content is, where there might be gaps and so on, how to take advantage of the data that exists to really inform what kind of direction to give the content production team. What new material needs to be created, what assets would lend themselves to developing more engagement with customers and so on. Without that insight, it's kind of guesswork and means that a lot of content potentially goes either unused or effort is misplaced in wasting time producing stuff that really no one wants or needs. This notion of content gaps is also one that can leave a lot of organizations struggling. If you know full well what your visitors are looking for and didn't find, you have a very clear signal as to what to go and build, what to go and write for, what to create next. And how do you prioritize that? How can you have some quantitative measure in your data that says that one gap is far bigger than another, and therefore what importance do you place on content creation? And this speaks to how to prioritize it. If I know that there's a high demand for a certain set of materials or information about a certain topic or trend or product or whatever it happens to be, I can very quickly prioritize the efforts, or indeed, frankly, reprioritize the efforts of my content production team. There may be a burning need to very quickly publish information based on an emerging trend. And if you don't have content about that, but people are coming to your site on the presumption that you do, well, guess what? They're going to go somewhere else because they haven't found what they need. And you may lose the opportunities to capitalize on, a nice spike in traffic that otherwise, if you had the content, you'd be keeping those visitors and building an ongoing relationship with them. And then, of course, there's the grim reality that most organizations have a finite capacity to actually create content. And what we hear many times is organizations that are investing, for example, in the capability to deliver much more personalized content kind of hit a little bit of a brick wall when they start thinking about all of the different permutations and combinations of content that would be required to deal with all of the multiples of personas and segmentations by demographics and so on and so forth. And the multiplier effect can mean that you end up with these very large spreadsheets of possible content combinations that seem overwhelming. Well, how to effectively get around that problem by firstly addressing that which is going to be of use, and secondly, being able to actually use the data and the tools to do some of that in an automated fashion as well. So these are some of the challenges that face content owners today, and hopefully some of those, if not all of them, resonate with you on the call. The challenge, of course, is that if you don't take advantage of this, and I alluded to it, there can be some negative impacts, not least of which is that people simply go away and you miss the opportunity. It affects obviously things like bounce rates. It affects things like time on site, page depth, and all of the metrics that people look closely at for what level of visitor engagement they have. But there's some other things as well. What we've also found is if you look at things like particularly one of the most measured areas of web deployment is where people have put up web properties, particularly to solve things like customer self-service, where customers are coming back to really find information for themselves. They want to be empowered. They want relevant information readily available at their fingertips, and they tend to have problems by definition that they want to solve. Well, the irony of it is that the satisfaction rate of websites as a basis for helping customers get the information they need in a support mode is lower than any other channel they have to turn to, even though it's the first one they prefer. So there's this quandary. There's this quandary of most people prefer to use your website, and yet they're least satisfied by it, particularly in the scenario of trying to find information as a customer for example, support purposes. And this might be a worst case, but this tends to be where we have the most evidence of dissatisfaction because obviously those customers are ready, willing, and able to be polled. And one of the challenges is that very often what comes back is that there's insufficient information available because the content exists in other repositories and silos. So one of the key things to be able to do is to ensure that when people are at your site, first and foremost, are you bringing to bear the variety of content that you have through your organization? Not just that which is in your Sitecore content repository, but other supporting documentation, materials, video clips, YouTube channels, whatever else you have that you can also present to the customer through your Sitecore website at the same time. So if someone, for example, is searching for an answer on, how to use a product, I don't know, how to put up a tent, for argument's sake, yes, you've probably got some information in your content repository that you can readily serve up as a web page. But if what they're really looking for is a quick, 5-minute video how-to guide that might exist on your YouTube channel, well, you should be able to serve that up as well. Unfortunately, most organizations don't take advantage of these multiple content repositories. They have valuable information sitting in silos that the data says customers would value, but they're not bringing to bear in the experience. And that comes down to things like knowing where that information exists, maintaining it, and so on. Obviously, making sure that the information you have is current. One of the things we hear very frequently is if there is a lack of trust in the content because there's no clear aging and dating of it, customers lose confidence in looking at what they've got and they go elsewhere. So very important is to actually have a knowledge management approach to the content that you're presenting, to ensure that it's current, to ensure that it's date stamped, and to give customers reassurance that this is indeed the most recent information, and therefore not only is it relevant, it's current and salient for them. And equally, that there are no obvious content gaps to the customer, that they're able to provide information, or your organizations are able to provide information that people look for. So often, those content gaps emerge where people simply didn't get an answer, and they just spent too long. So this is unfortunately why the web gets a bad rap on this kind of scoring, is because people's expectations are really high. They assume everything's going to be at their fingertips, and unfortunately it just isn't. So how to go about resolving this? Well, one of the key things, and obviously the topic of this webinar, is to really be able to embrace some of the data and the analytics that search provides. It's probably worth spending a little bit of time talking about the category of site search itself, because there is a wealth of information, a wealth of data that is harnessed that you can take advantage of. And I guess that maybe the starting point for this is to recognize that, first and foremost, when anyone is searching on your site, they are, of course, providing you with insight into the kind of keywords that they're using. And by at least unifying the search across multiple resources and utilizing Sitecore's capability to can combine with Coveo to bring content from other repositories, it means that not only are those keywords showing up, but that you're also able to start delivering content against them from both inside Sitecore and beyond, because Coveo will have effectively indexed it. From an analytics point of view, of course, this gives you deep insight into the kind of content level engagement that people are interacting with. It also, of course, gives you keyword visibility, specifically what terms they were using, what they found, what they didn't, what they were desiring, what kind of synonyms existed. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, is that the way the search capability itself has evolved is to significantly compensate for things like misspellings, typos, terminology and phraseology. You need to ensure that you're not making it hard for your customers to have to second guess the exact right keyword in order to yield a result. And modern search technologies such as Coveo, of course, take care of that for customers and automatically recommend those terms that have proven to be popular. Nonetheless, the data under the hood is what tells you very specifically what they're looking for, and therefore gives you insight into what to do about it. But that's at a keyword level. The other piece of it, of course, is that the data about the individuals themselves, their profiles. That data is captured and monitored, and what that does is it provides insights into not just the sort of terminology that's being utilized, but a better understanding of the visitors themselves. The Sitecore Experience Database, which is what Sitecore uses to hold information about every single visitor to your site, both anonymously and known. Coveo takes advantage of that information and combines with it to effectively correlate search traffic and search behavior with your visitors. And this really gives you the ability to really understand what different groups of people are looking for, maybe different profile groups are looking for, what are the sort of trends that they might be picking up on, and it again inform you very specifically of what kinds of segments of your customers or your visitors are interested in certain areas. The whole benefit of personalization is to give the right information to the right people. If you can readily identify that certain segments or groups are more interested in certain terms, or that there are gaps that you've got that address a certain demographic or profile group, then clearly you can respond and know that you're tailoring accordingly. There's a piece underneath it, though, which is that because search is now gathering this information and tracking all of that user behavior, and combining it with the profile data in the Sitecore Experience platform, it means that you're also building a bank of knowledge that can be used by Sitecore and Coveo to do data-driven content management. We'll spend more, I'll touch on this briefly later, but this is the idea that if you know what someone searched for, how do you use that information to deliver more personalized content back to them? And effectively, if you don't have something that is exactly what they're looking for, potentially substitute it with something that does. The fact that that analytics system is tracking under the hood gives you, firstly, therefore, better insight, and secondly, the raw material to understand what good looks like. And the third piece of this is that, this combination of technology brings into place the ability to understand the intent of people. So if I know what keywords people have looked at, and I've got this analysis and behavioral tracking of what folks have done, and I'm identifying the paths and the journeys that visitors have been on, I have an immense amount of data to inform me on the kind of content that ultimately culminated in good experiences. That's the sort of raw material that any good machine learning or AI-powered system looks for to continually refine. And so with an intelligent search engine, what it's doing is effectively taking all of that information about the content that people looked at, the context within which they did it, and the fact that many, many folks did it again and again and again, and effectively using it to automate the relevance of what is presented back in terms of search results and in terms of content presentation. This really means that those analytics can be used not just for reporting and insights, but actually starting to get into driving the experience automatically as well. So those three things, the keywords, the ability to understand more from an analytics standpoint, and ultimately infer intent by actually combining that with the patterns of what other visitors have done and where they've successfully achieved in the past. This is the basis of actually harnessing that data to drive much more of a data-driven content strategy. So how to turn that into practice? What does one do? There's, I guess, kind of three key things to think about there. And maybe first and foremost is, we'll touch on each of these in turn, to really understand search trends. What are the activities in that search box inferring? What can you pick up? What can you glean? We'll spend some more time looking at each of these in turn. We'll also learn more about the user activity. What is it that people did? What worked? What didn't? And then obviously from a success standpoint, how do you identify what good looks like? And so what does that mean? Let's take search trends. One of the things you want to be able to do, of course, is just fundamentally understand what are people looking for? What are the kind of search terms? And what's the frequency with which they're being searched for? How do I identify the fact that a term might be being used that has, spiked up very quickly that really we, frankly just don't have any content for? If we're able to see that there are certain phrases or certain terms that just culminated in, no reply or, no content and a bounce, this is a clear signal. That doesn't mean you need to necessarily create content for every single term. There's a long tail for all of these things. But the data very clearly tells you what people are looking for. And so from an operational point of view, what you want to be doing is setting yourself up to review this, I would argue, at least weekly. If you can do it more frequently than that, all well and good. But at least on a weekly basis, someone should be checking your search log to identify the kind of trends that exist, the kind of patterns, so that on the next sprint or the next content push, however you're organized, you've already lined up something to effectively take care of that. What's absolutely crucial with this is that this provides real hard data about the kind of things your visitors are looking for. There's no guesswork involved. What's also important is that if you don't have content, you can very clearly see how many visitors you lost. You may have metrics that you know the value of your visitor, you know your conversion rates, and you can also very quickly build out a return on investment or a cost justification model as to why, for example, you might need another content creator, or you may need to bring in an outside contractor on retainer to be creating content on demand. This is gold. This isn't just about knowing what your gaps are. It's being able to actually then build out an operational model to solve them, to justify it, and to effectively show the impact and the yield from improving it as we go. What are the topics that are most important to your visitors? Also, there's an expression that I know we've used before where if no matter what you're doing from an organic point of view or from a paid acquisition point of view, you want to make sure that when someone arrives at your site that they land well. They land well. In other words, they're getting a payoff. They're getting a landing page or an arrival page or an entry page that meets and beats their expectations, that causes them to dig deeper, that encourages them to move further down your whatever the desired funnel or journey is that you'd ideally like them to take, and that they don't bounce. Well, if you are particularly paying for your acquisition and you're not giving them the experience that they want and they don't land well, you're almost having a double whammy on your costs. You've paid for them to arrive there. They've shown up. You have effectively paid Google or Facebook or whomever for the privilege of having them arrive at that page. They didn't get what they found, and they left. The opportunity cost of this is significant. So again, you'll have the metrics that are unique to your organization as to what the value of a visitor is worth. When you start doing the arithmetic and realizing how much more can be gained by filling the gaps and meeting these search trends, all well and good. So what about the folks that stay? Well, who's searching for what? Can you infer any particular groups or profiles are looking for certain products? Are there patterns that can be gleaned from certain customer groups? Are there, for example, customers of one product who are potentially looking for information about another? This is, again, a gold mine of information from a merchandising point of view, whether you're an e-commerce store or simply a website that is providing more information to your customers or prospects or partners. What those existing customers or partners have and what else they're looking for gives you very clear signals as to the kind of follow-ons, customer expansion opportunities, cross-sells, and so on, they may be interested in seeing. So depending on who is searching for what, this gives you some very clear signals about what to merchandise to whom. Again, the benefit of a Sitecore-driven site is that you have the flexibility to offer content to groups of people, not everyone, i.e. personalizing. And this again gives you some very clear pointers as to the kind of, for example, content modules that you might want to pop up to certain profile groups based on having seen interest from people like them for a certain ancillary or complementary product. There's no guesswork involved here. You're not merchandising something or offering up content to someone who has no interest in it. You've got a pretty good inference that people in that profile group will be interested in seeing that content and therefore will, frankly, be delighted and interact with it. What action do they take? Did the content that you put up yield a conversion? Are you also, for example, A/B testing to see what the results of that activity are? What took them along further down the path? And in other words, what is the behavior that you're seeing? What kind of proximity or nearness to your preferred or ideal buyer journeys are they going through? Or are they taking very, very different journeys that would cause you to perhaps rethink or identify other areas that would supplement that content map? And the third piece of this is visitor success. So what does good look like? What leads to conversions? How is it that people are effectively able to help themselves to a point of satisfaction and walk away from your site with what they needed? And again, are there results that you can glean from, for example, A/B testing that would infer that certain content is being better received, landing well than others? Well, the combination of Coveo and Sitecore starts to reveal this stuff because we're able to use both those sets of analytics under the hood, coupled with things like identifying the depending on what your goals are that you've set up on your site, what is driving towards those goals and what things are potentially detracting from them. So ultimately seeing under the hood what visitor success looks like as well. All of this stuff is available in standard dashboards that are very easy, again, on an operational level to review once a week and use those as the very specific raw material for what content changes you're going to make the following week. So why do this? What difference does it make? I think one of the key things we found is that, bear in mind that folks that are interacting with you through search are doing so because they're in a special place. They have already got some kind of predisposition to finding out something specific. By definition, they're either customers that have got a problem and they know they need to solve it, or they're prospects that have a question or a specific concern or area of interest that they're frankly telling you. And so the better you can provide the right content for them and the more accurately you can service them, the better the results. So specifically, if we think of things like folks that actually come to the site and use the search box first, tend to have a much higher propensity to be looking at a specific product or category. Why? Just because they're further along in the funnel. And the fact that, again, this is probably not their first encounter with you, although there is data that shows something like 32% of visitors to a site will use search as their first-time primary navigation. Even ignoring that fact, the fact that someone comes to your site and is using a product or a category term that they may know, might not be specific to you, means they're at least inferring that, or they're assuming that you're an organization that can give them more information or solve their need about that product or category. If that category is something that you're in, but you don't say so, then that might show up as a content gap, and it may even cause you to want to refine and change things like your folder structures to meet the expectations of those customers. But 43% of them have an intent to do something deeper than simply browse and skim by your site. They're also significantly more likely to convert, almost 5x. Why? Because they're further down the buying cycle. And so this isn't the people that search versus the people that don't. The people that do search are a lot further down. Therefore, you want to make sure that they get what they need. This is a primary buying audience or a primary engaging audience for you. And the fact that they exhibit that behavior tells you something about the state of their own cycle on your, or life cycle on your customer journey with them. And they also, ironically, tend to spend longer on the site. This might sound counterproductive. If I'm using a site that's well organized and it's got a great, AI-powered search capability, isn't it giving me the right information first time? Short answer is yes. But because it's given me the right information first time, I'm much more likely to continue interacting with it and delving deeper. In other words, I'm now more engaged. So that's actually time well spent. It's not time hunting around looking for the right content. It's engaging with deeper and deeper content and moving further through your buying process. So I'll wrap this up and say that central to this then is the ability, first and foremost, to be able to know and gather information about who is searching for what on your site. The fact that they are providing you with that wealth of information at a keyword level is in itself useful. The analytics that come with it through Coveo integrated with Sitecore means that you're able to not only put some quantitative analysis into what's important, but that you're also starting to set yourself up to be able to use that data for personalization purposes. And that all of that raw material becomes the fodder for the machine learning that ultimately drives more automated personalization later. The results are significant. Customers will stay on your site longer. They'll interact with you more effectively. They'll find it more engaging, and they're much, much more likely to convert. So hopefully that's given you an insight into the kind of ways that you can take advantage of the search data that exists in your property or should exist in your property to help inform your operational content decisions and ultimately drive your content and your personalization strategy as you move forward. With that, I'll open up for questions. And I guess, Michaela, at this point, do you want to let us know if there are any questions that have come through?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark, for the great presentation. And to everyone on the line, we are going to start taking questions. So again, if you do have a question, you can enter it in the Ask a Question box right below the slides, and we will try to get to as many as possible. We do have a few questions that rolled in, so Mark, let's get started.
Sure, look forward to it.
First question. Awesome. First question. How does Coveo know what content has performed best?
What's performed best? Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. So basically, what we do, because Coveo and Sitecore effectively integrate, and as I said, Coveo has been a Sitecore partner for 8 years, 9 years. We've always been really, really close to Sitecore and taken advantage of the kind of innovations that they've had. And one of those, for example, was in the experience database, there is this capability to track outcomes. And an outcome in Sitecore parlance is kind of a final goal, a goal being kind of like a conversion. If you think of the best way to perhaps express it isn't in an e-commerce environment. Someone might, for example, look at a product page, and the fact that they choose to add it to a cart, you might call a goal, but they haven't checked out yet. They might add something else to a cart. That's another goal. Good. They still haven't checked out yet. The outcome is when they check out and give you their money. And so that notion of outcomes in Sitecore, we use as a deterministic basis of saying this is what good looks like. And that outcome could be, for example, a transaction. It could be viewing a video. It could be filling in a mortgage application form. Whatever is specific to your business, you'll be setting up that outcome as kind of an overall goal, the best conversion you can have, the destination event that you want someone to have done that you can be happy about. What Coveo then does is look at that as a basis for informing what were the content assets, what were the search terms, what was all the stuff that helped get towards that outcome, and what was the stuff that detracted from it. So we're able to effectively analyze all of the interactions along the way and identify those pieces of content both within Sitecore and from outside of Sitecore that have been presented to your customers that help them get there. And it may well be, for example, that we can see that, you know, people that, for example, completed an outcome, statistically, most of them looked at a particular video on YouTube that was being merchandised as well. Okay, so that video, although it isn't actually a Sitecore asset, is part of an important part of the buyer's journey, and that's how we can effectively rank it as content that's performed best.
Perfect. Next question that rolled in. You mentioned making sure customers land well on a page. How do you suggest getting started course correcting if customers are not landing well?
Yeah, very good point. So your analytics are central to identifying, you know, when they haven't landed well. So what are the things that are causing people to drop off? You have resources such as things like heat maps that will at least give you indications of what people have looked at on, for example, particular pages. And those are normally a very quick early indicator of you know, where they're not clicking. So a basic example could be you may have a primary call to action on your page that is, you know, 3 or 4 scrolls down. And there are 2 schools of thought here. There's a school of thought that says for engaged customers that will scroll down to those, that have consumed that information and click on it. And there's some good data that shows many people do just that. Your heat map would indicate it. The corollary is also true. In that same example, if what you're not seeing is any heat over that button and you're not seeing people get through to it, then I would test 2 things. I would move the call to action further up to see if it's simply a matter of placement, or I would shorten the content and see if I can tighten the whole thing up. So those are examples of, you know, where you start to diagnose where people are not converting, why not. Equally, from, you know, as I said, in terms of the search analytics side of things, because you're also able to go back and see, for example, what terms people look for that there was no content for, those are also going to be primary places to make the presumption that if someone went into the search box and typed in, you know, a product that you don't have, maybe it's even a competitor product, and they left, that's a quick fix as well.
Awesome. Next question that rolled in. How does Coveo machine learning work?
Okay, so Coveo machine learning is basically a set of machine learning algorithms and capabilities that we've developed over time in our cloud-based environment that really do several things. What we're effectively doing is combining, in broad strokes, 3 buckets of information, of data. One of those is information about the content itself. So what content exists both inside the Sitecore content management system and indeed in other repositories that Coveo is connected to, and looking at what content people are interacting with. What search terms are they using to find things? So what is the content level of interaction? The second thing we look at is the context of the visitor. So are they, you know, a new anonymous visitor? Are they known to the website? Are they, for example, in the Sitecore environment, are they an existing customer with an existing experience profile? Do they have existing pattern card or profile cards that they have shown that they are most likely to be? A simple example could be if you're a travel site, running Sitecore, you may have profile cards set up between business and family travelers. And maybe people have already exhibited that they're more likely to be business travelers. Coveo understands that context and so bears that in mind as well. And then the third piece of it is this behavioral data. In other words, not just what one person's done, but what has everyone done? What is the sum total of search-based analytics journeys that we can use to, I guess, think about it as the wisdom of crowds. What can we use to infer what content worked for people? Which content led to those positive outcomes? We take all of that and we effectively put it through a whole series of proprietary algorithms that we have, and we use our machine learning capability to continually improve and make recommendations as to what the most relevant content is for certain groups of people, certain profiles, and so on. And it's that effectively is how the machine learning works. It's combining knowledge of what content people interact with, the contextual context of those folks, and indeed marrying it and contrasting it against the behavioral analytics of the rest of the population to predict what is likely to be the most salient recommendation we can make.
Absolutely. Next question for you. What do you see as the next big thing in search usage analytics?
The next big thing. I think what we're seeing is that people are harnessing this data in new and innovative ways to drive, frankly, new and innovative experiences. I'll give you some specific examples. There's been a lot of talk, for example, about chatbots. Everyone's like, got to have a chatbot. Why? There are so many chatbots in existence that consumers already use, whether that's Facebook Messenger, whether that's Slack, whether that's frankly just talking to your Siri or your Alexa or whatever your voice assistant is. There are many existing and rapidly mainstream ways that people are interacting with each other. And one of the things we've seen some of the more pioneering customers do is recognize that what those really are is just a point of interaction. They're a way or an interface that customers are choosing to prefer to engage with companies. But that they can use those as the, if you like, the raw material against which search technologies can happen to give the right answer back. So if someone, for example, is interacting with you through an online chat and they put in, whatever, a question or some information about a product or whatever it is, that, yes, could be replied to by an agent in a contact center, and that's fine. Typically, those agents in contact centers can deal with 2 or 3 chats versus 1 live phone conversation. However, what if you could effectively put that through an AI-powered search tool that could understand what that text meant, apply it to your search index, and deliver back the most relevant content personalized to that individual? That's one of the key areas we're seeing search analytics being used for now, because frankly, it's the same as if someone basically typed into a search box on a website, except they didn't. They did it verbally through, for example, an Alexa interface, or they typed it into, their friendly chat clients, such as Facebook Messenger. And, we've been working with a lot of companies to use that point of interaction as simply another basis for, hitting Coveo search and delivering back the most relevant response to that customer.
Awesome. What are some architectural challenges that we should know/consider during Coveo/Sitecore integration based on lessons learned from your previous implementation?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things I would strongly encourage is that in any one of these things you work very closely with an accredited Sitecore and Coveo partner. Because we've been working closely together for as long as we have a very strong overlap of co-qualified systems integrator partners in our ecosystem. And they are going to be central to designing and architecting up front. The things that, what does success look like? Success looks like involving an SI partner early in the process and thinking broadly about the sources of content that you have inside your organization. It's not just about the content on your website in the existing Sitecore CMS. You've got to think broadly about the fact that you may have, for example, as I said, a YouTube or a Vimeo channel, for example. You may have data in a business system that is not connected to Sitecore and may never be, but could be useful raw material for helping customers. You may have PDFs in a Google Drive someplace that lend themselves to bringing into the equation. There may be product documentation materials and manuals that could be helpful. Where does all that content live? By going through that thought process at the front, you're able to help give the systems integrator good guidance on what kind of systems you have that Coveo would effectively be connecting to index. We have about 75 native connectors to various on-prem and cloud systems, and a whole series of developer tools that our integrators use to connect to other proprietary systems and systems of weirdness and legacy, so that that data can be gathered together and made available for your customers. That's a key part, and we find that very often it's neglected because people might think, oh, I'm just doing site search, I just need to think about the content that's inside Sitecore. No, that's not going to be a comprehensive set of results for your customers. Coveo can help you index all this other stuff and rank it by relevance and present it through Sitecore. So that's fundamental. The second piece of it really is to think about how you're effectively architecting where is your Sitecore instance going to live. More and more we're seeing customers embrace the flexibility and capability of cloud hosting. There are fewer and fewer customers saying, oh, I need to build this inside my own data center. People like Microsoft with their Azure services, or Amazon with AWS, or Rackspace, or there are many other companies that are providing hosted environments within which you can run your Sitecore instance. We strongly recommend, obviously as an outsider, that that's a much more scalable approach. It's a lot more flexible approach. We see it, frankly, as a more cost-effective approach. And selfishly, Coveo is a cloud-based offering. We do have the ability to work with organizations who just have Sitecore in let's call it an on-prem environment. In other words, just in your own data center. But it limits us. The machine learning stuff that I spoke about, we do in our cloud. So in one scenario or another, to get the best out of the combination of these two things, Coveo's machine learning capability takes place in our cloud environment. And it will index wherever it happens to be. But architecturally, the more you think about cloud computing as the basis for your Sitecore environment, the more future-proof you will be as well. So, summary, work closely with an SI up front, think about the data sources, and think about ultimately where do you want this all to live. Take a really close look at moving to cloud and being in cloud.
That's great insight. Thank you so much. We are going to start wrapping up, so I have one last question for you. How does content personalization work with Coveo?
Wow, that's a big one. I'll try and answer it succinctly. So I mentioned earlier when one of the questions was about how does the machine learning work? Well, because of that analytics capability and identifying, if you like, what good looks like and what other visitors before found helpful, and constantly analyzing that, we can put that to work. And so what Coveo does in conjunction with Sitecore is effectively say, this one piece of content or this asset or this paragraph or this snippet, whatever it is, has proven to be more relevant to this kind of visitor than other content, and therefore let's automatically push that. What that does is it means it takes the pressure off the content managers to have to think it through every permutation and combination. Coveo will make a best guess based on analyzing all of that data of probabilistically what will be most appropriate and to insert that into Sitecore to present. And this is a longer topic, but it really does mean that you're not having to do the heavy lifting by hand of trying to think through all of the different rules that might be in place. You're really harnessing the full power of Sitecore, supplemented with this machine learning capability from Coveo to automate the presentation of that based on what's effectively been proven to be used by the machine learning itself. We've actually got a follow-on webinar in the virtual summit series. I think it's on the 7th. September the 7th, where we specifically look at, how to actually personalize this content. So for folks that are interested in that, I'd strongly encourage you to make sure that you register for that September 7th one, where we go into this topic specifically in more depth.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. And if anyone does have any additional questions, feel free to send an email directly to info@coveo.com. You can see the email address right on this slide. We will be sending out an email to everyone shortly with access to the recording so you can watch the presentation again or share it with coworkers or friends. We hope to see you all at the next Sitecore Global Virtual Summit webinar. Take care, everyone.